All right, so why don't we get started? Thanks everyone for joining us for our first Minds webinar. We had a great turnout in terms of registration. There will be people continuing to trickle in, I'm sure, in this time of Zoom usage. So I want to introduce myself and Minds just briefly, and I'll hand it over to Nina thereafter. So I'm Raghu Appasani, founder of Minds Foundation. We've been working in the mental health space for about 10 years now, primarily working in India, starting in Gujarat, and now working in other regions as well. So given the uncertain time that we're in, we decided that we bring our community virtual and create some platforms to support them. So I'll hand it over to Nina, who's actually going to be moderating our discussion this evening. And for any of you that have other friends or family that are not able to squeeze into our Zoom, because there is a 100-person capacity, they can view us on Facebook Live. It's facebook.com/The Minds Foundation.
Thank you so much, Raghu. And thank you all for joining us today for our webinar on self-care in the times of COVID. Immensely grateful to Minds for organizing this in partnership with the Poddar Foundation and World Economic Forum Global Shapers. So to set a bit of a context here, we all know that we're going through unprecedented times in the history of mankind. Never has there been such a fear of the unknown and such a lockdown. So in addition to the physical sort of fallout of this, the disease itself, the psychosocial costs of this pandemic are huge. A variety of issues are presenting themselves in the wake of the storm, from anxiety and depression, OCD, to we're usually expecting a lot of PTSD, domestic violence, interpersonal violence, alcohol and substance abuse, and a huge amount of pervasive financial insecurity. And in some cases, there's also suicide. And I think it's very important for us that while all of this is causing a huge disruption at every level and things are seeming really gloomy, we have to believe that they're going to get better. It's very hard to accept that, I feel. And as I was writing this, I was kind of questioning myself. I was like, we have to believe that things will get better, because they will. They might get worse before they get better, but they will get better. But the important question is, what do we need to do at this point? Because scientists, doctors, researchers, governments, everybody is doing their job. What we need to focus on is being responsible and on taking care of ourselves the best that we can. Whether we're regular Samaritans or whether we're at the front line, as healthcare professionals, we have to put ourselves first. Help others, but first put yourself out there and take care of yourself. And we were discussing that, what are the ways that we can try and make ourselves feel better. And one of the things that came up was, again, a pervasive theme for all of us, was that find ways to give yourself personal agency, develop a sense of personal agency. So see what is within your control. If you have the bandwidth, try and find a resolve to see what you can do best for yourself as the first line of defense, which might be something as simple as imbibing a gratitude practice, might be, starting a practice of mindfulness, trying meditation and yoga to soothe your nerves, exercising, or just plain movement to make sure that you're mobile, and create a routine to establish predictability, because when you can't control what's happening outside, the best you can possibly do is create a routine for yourself so there's predictability. If you are in a safe environment, spending time with your family is a great option. And also, while maintaining social distance is important, it is equally important to stay in touch with one's community. And that's something which is very interesting for me personally, because I've noticed how our community is coming together, whether it's my neighborhood, whether it's my friend circle, we all suddenly have a lot of time for each other. And again, I was hesitating to say this, because while it seems difficult and guilt-provoking to be celebratory while people are ailing and there's a huge loss of life, and uncertainty, we still have to try and be deliberately positive to bring about that shift mentally. It's almost sort of like fake it till you make it. And that's my personal belief. And without being cliche, there's always a silver lining when there's a calamity. Try and find yours during this time, and not negating the fact that there's a calamity that's happened, but to acknowledge both the bane and the boon of this, that you're getting this time to kind of pause. It's a forceful pause that we're all being made to do in our lives. Try and adopt certain habits and behaviors that might hold you in good stead in the future. Cultivate resilience and imagine and work around seeing what that may look like for you. Be aware, and this was something that was, again, a common theme for everybody, was that be aware of what your social media diet is. Are you sanitizing your data consumption? Are you careful about the resources that you're reaching out to get your information? Because you don't want to be sort of mired in thoughts which are based on too much data, and God forbid if the data is wrong, you know. So we have with us an esteemed panel of specialists bringing their unique point of view to bring to light the reality of the times that we're going through, from understanding the ramifications of the disaster, the possible outcomes, understanding the truly vulnerable demographics, and sharing of tips and resources to reach out to. So our first speaker is Dr. Craig Katz, and good Lord, he's highly acclaimed, and it was very difficult for me to cut down his bio, but here goes. So Dr. Craig Katz is a clinical professor of psychiatry, medical education, system design, and global health at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai in New York City, where he has served in various clinical and administrative roles since joining the faculty in 2000. Dr. Katz founded and directs Mount Sinai's program in global mental health, an interest that grew out of his experience in organizing and providing psychiatric services to disaster-affected communities since 1988. Through an organization he co-founded and led, Disaster Psychiatry Outreach is the name. Those efforts included organizing the psychiatric response to 9/11 in New York City, including starting and for many years directing the World Trade Center mental health screening and treatment program for 9/11 responders. Dr. Katz also serves as faculty director for advocacy of Mount Sinai's human rights program. Dr. Katz has written and co-edited a number of books and papers in the fields of disaster psychiatry, global psychiatry, including a guide to global mental health practice, Seeing the Unseen. He's a native of Long Island and attended Harvard College and went on to Columbia, where he obtained his medical degree, completed his psychiatric residency training, and served as a chief resident in psychiatry. He subsequently completed a fellowship in forensic psychiatry at NYU. Dr. Katz is married to Linda, who hopefully has joined us by now, a pediatrician and a child psychiatrist, and is a proud father of a 17-year-old Maya and 13-year-old Lev. So Dr. Katz will be giving us a historical perspective on the pandemic in terms of the disaster aspect of it. What are the mental health challenges during a pandemic interventions related to that, the importance of social support and psychiatric care for the long term. So Craig, over to you, please.
Thank you, Nina, for that nice and generous introduction. So yeah, I'm going to speak a bit about, just to give you a historical perspective on the psychosocial aspects of infectious outbreaks. And I will get to this slide in a moment. This is what I'm leading up to. We have history about human reactions to infectious outbreaks dating all the way back to the Black Plagues in the mid-1300s in Europe. And we even have data that's already been released from China from COVID-19. And if we go all the way back in time, we can see that during, let's say, the Black Plagues, when there was an outbreak, there seemed to be pandemonium, right? The human behavior was not organized. There was social distancing in the most extreme of ways, which is even families being afraid of one another, parents and child. At least that's what the history books tell us. And you know, what's understood to be the reason for that is because way back then there was no medical science or public health science that was available to kind of frame it and inform people and help them to understand what's going on and give them some direction from a coordinated source, which is not to say some, as Nina said, some good does come from bad. Actually, from the Black Plague, that's where the idea of having a public health authority actually came from, and the idea of sharing information. And then when we leap forward to information from the Spanish flu, which struck the world in 1918, right after World War I, right, that was one of the deadliest events in history. Like 50 million people died in that. And there too, there's a challenge, at least here in the United States, because our government made the decision not to share information. There are quotes available from public health officials around the country saying that worse than the pandemic is fear, and so they didn't want to talk about it, so they didn't share information, or they overstated the facts and actually reassured people where reassurances weren't appropriate, and that again seemed to lead to a lot of chaos and dysfunction, societal dysfunction. And in cities in the States where governments were more open and direct, people did better. When we fast forward now to recent few decades, there was a similar problem in, I think, in 1994 with a plague outbreak in India and in several states, and at least from what I've read, particularly in the city of Surat, there were problems with a lack of communication, and I think it was reported that like hundreds of thousands of people fled the city, including doctors. That's not good, but again, the feeling was that the government did a poor job of communicating with people, and that was the consequence. Sorry, Nina, were you going to say something? Oh, okay. And from even more recent events, we know about however, that when you start to give people information and share, this is what we know about the event, this is what you need to do, this is what the government is doing, it's a much more organized response. And we also know that in the long term, and we have this information from the SARS epidemic that broke out in 2003, right? That was China, Hong Kong, Singapore. I think it affected Toronto as well. There was some actual research done following people after the event, and definitely sufferers of SARS. There's like one small study that I could find that looked at this. Sufferers from SARS in the long term had much higher rates of post-traumatic stress disorder and major depression than you expect just from going out and studying random people in the community. And healthcare workers also had particularly high rates, especially respiratory therapists and of course other frontline workers. And what we also know from that event is that the healthcare workers, whom we're of course right now the most worried about, in addition to those who were sick, what was protective for the healthcare workers was feeling like they had good information and good support from their colleagues. That reduced their risk of developing PTSD and major depression. So that's a consistent theme. And then, finally, we do have some data out of China about COVID-19 and mental health. Again, looking at healthcare workers, and not surprisingly, this is from late January. So for China, that would, I think, be maybe a couple of months into their outbreak there. But you're already seeing very high rates of PTSD and major depression in the healthcare workers, and in particular in nurses and frontline workers, and in people actually in Wuhan and Hubei, right? Like right at the center of things, right? So if you're kind of at that kind of the ground zero of the event, you're just at much higher risk. And of course, right now in the world, there are ground zeros all over the place. Right now, we have that in New York and in all of our hospitals and in my own hospital at Mount Sinai. And now I want to show you though, if we can put that slide up, please, about the anxiety curve. Yeah, so this is a really important concept. What this slide lays out is stress on the bottom axis, the x-axis, and performance function on the y-axis. And what we want to do is, whether we, forgetting for now the long-term consequences, but thinking about the short term, because if we address the short term, we're going to hopefully reduce the risk of long-term mental health problems. We want to keep people on the good side of this curve, on the good stress side, right? So as stress goes up, we function better, and we get to hopefully a sweet spot at the top where it says optimal stress. And that's ideally where we want to be. We want to be, in a sense, stressed enough that we are doing all the things that we need to do, that our government tells us to do, to take care of ourselves, and not so stressed that we start going down the other side into what we would call bad stress and dysfunction. And hopefully we'll have a chance later on to talk about that, but about how you can actually do that, the things one can do. But in short, I guess I would say, one, anxiety and fear we know from history, are part of outbreaks, infectious outbreaks. Two, it's a normal reaction. We should expect to be anxious, and it's okay. And three, we want to try our best to keep the anxiety and the fear reaction in some perspective, and try to aim for that sweet spot of optimal stress. Thank you. I think I'll turn it back over to Nina.
My internet was a bit patchy right there. Thank you so much for that, Craig. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you, Craig, for that. And we'll have questions for you later. So our next panelist is Dr. Prakriti Poddar. She's been working in the area of mental wellness since 1999. A mental health entrepreneur, she runs a thriving practice of mental health services through her company Mind Over Image Consulting, focusing on counseling, clinical hypnotherapy, and various other modalities. Prakriti is a very well-known voice of mental wellness and has spoken nationally and internationally on numerous platforms to highlight the need of mental health awareness, literacy, current issues, and strategies. As a managing trustee of Poddar Foundation, Prakriti focuses on raising awareness of mental health issues and creating preventive mental health programs for the nation. The foundation does myriad outreach programs and additionally operates a brand called Silence Toro. The platform helps break the silence around mental health illness and disharmonies, and builds white papers for solutions on mental health related policies. She's also working on mobilizing insurance companies to build insurance for mental health. Her firm, Poddar Wellness, focuses on holistic well-being in the workplace and additionally involves training and development. Prakriti has a number of awards to her name, and she balances her week between therapy, overseeing the foundation, managing Poddar Wellness, her 3 children, her 2 dogs, always leaving her time for her passion in yoga, weightlifting, and tennis. Today, she will be taking on the topic of the specific impact on youth and the vulnerable, because not everyone is in a healthy space right now. So over to you, Prakriti.
Thank you, Nina. So I want to start by showing you this picture, because the only people that are doing well, or the only environment that's doing well, is Earth, because we've actually ruined it in the past, and it's taking a break. It's taking a break and trying to fix itself. But apart from that, let's move on and really take you through photos of what is happening with the vulnerable. So we have a lot of vulnerable people suffering. They don't have homes. They're being put into like small little sheds, a lot of them, which is obviously, if one of the fears that they have in India is if it ever hits the slums, there is no recovering from it, because there are so many people there. The population is so dense. There are 4 families living in 1 bedroom. So you can imagine how many people that would be for right? So that's about 16 people in 1 space at least. But that's when they're indoors. But otherwise, you can see, like the photo shows you, that there are a lot more people just outside, and it's difficult to pick them up and try and make them sort of transit to another place, because I'll show you why the moment you move on to the next slide. So this was, of course, something that was needed, and Modi ji is quite strong in his opinions about things. So we are doing what he said. There's hardly anybody breaking the rule, which I think is good, because it might heal, everything faster. It is said that there may be 3 cycles, even though we've been told that 15th, the last day, they're saying it may have 3 cycles of 21 days. So we're bracing ourselves for what may come. kind of reminds me of when I was pregnant and on bed rest. I had to be on bed rest for like 7 months, and they kept telling me, next week you're going to be out and about. And I'm like, okay, great. I have a feeling this is the same thing. But anyway, let's move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. This is a video, so you can click it if it plays. Oh, it doesn't play. Okay, no problem. So can you go back to that video? This is, you can see the feet. These are people just lining up to be given, you know, biscuits, not cookies, they're called biscuits. Yeah. So they're just given biscuits and they're lining up, and literally that's their diet. And luckily a lot of Samaritans have come together to provide food. And you can go to the next slide. I think I have some photos of really what's happening. There's grains. This is all grain collection. Huge amount of grain collection. The Rotary Club has gotten involved. The Icahn has gotten involved. The religious movements have gotten involved, and they're delivering food to people. You can see the small boxes there. That's done by, I think, Belu Mani, who runs Thyrocare, and they've been distributing food as well. There's some great relief for nobody's going to go hungry unless they can't reach these spots where food is getting delivered. But everybody is behind food to consider the health and well-being of them is just based on whether they can nourish themselves. And I find that box quite funny, how they have a chocolate in there as well. I thought maybe, you know, that's cute, considering we're trying to do health and wellness. And every time I talk about health and wellness and how India doesn't understand health and wellness, and then I see this photo with like almond butter and you know, chocolate, and this is given to people for relief food. I'm quite impressed by our lack of knowledge on healthy food. But you can go, at least they're having some kind of nutrition, and that's okay. So of course, one of the other things that we do want to mention is people are thinking. You know, people have come together in community. Nina, you were talking about community. People are thinking. They're thinking about each other. They're thinking about giving back. The Modi government has got a lot of funds that are going around, care fund, relief funds, etc. They stand with the daily wage earners, because the daily wage earners are affected the most. They really have no income saved. They have no way of buying anything for their families. I mean, it's unprecedented, the kind of financial struggle a lot of the, you know, vulnerable societies are going through. Commodities, the police have gotten involved to deliver things as well. There is a friend of mine actually who runs another NGO who does a lot of relief for food, pharmaceutical drugs, and I think he's doing one more thing. I think he's doing a helpline as well of some sort. So people are getting involved. All the NGOs are sort of have geared up. And I can't tell you how, when you're talking about your optimal stress, I can't tell you how many people have fallen into that line of optimal stress and really surged forward to give back to society. You know, they all propelled themselves and threw themselves into saving, into doing what they could to save whatever it is that they had an influence over. You can go to the next slide. Ashim, yeah, okay, great. So I like this photo because it just showed how he was so happy to receive that food. And I think it's really touching, you know, it's really touching that we're taking care of each other. And talking about community, and, you know, you were talking about community and how people have got together. It is visible, you know, and I'm so proud of human beings at this point, because we've been taught how to break each other apart. You know, we've been taught to distribute ourselves through religion and through different sort of thought processes and narratives. And this pandemic, which is so bad, has really put us all in one boat, and we're all sailing in the right direction. You know, it's like our sails have all suddenly met, and I find that amazing. And I think, you know, I don't want to praise God, but it is that silver lining that we're talking about, because we're always breaking ourselves apart. This is us coming together as a community. You have to go on mute. It echoes otherwise. Thank you. You can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So these are the children. I know you said what's happening to the children. And of course, these are the children lined up. They're not unhappy. I mean, just look at their faces. They're not smiling for the camera. They're just happy that they're getting food and somebody's taking care of them. This did not happen when there was no pandemic. They were not given anything. They were not thought of. Now they're being thought of. So even though we have some violent photos, I have some friends all over the world, and they're like, what's happening in India? And I'm like, what do you mean, what's happening? India's fine, we're helping each other. And they're like showing me these photos of like what's coming on BBC and how everybody's getting sprayed with like, you know, of course I have that photo, but it's an 80-20 rule, okay? Maybe it's Pareto's principle, but the 80% are getting, I mean, we value them. It's not like we don't. But, you know, how many people can we actually take care of? But we're trying our best, and communities are doing this. So, I mean, from what I see, it is definitely thoughtful what we're trying to do with this situation at this point. If you go on to the next slide, please. I know this is the worst part, because the migrant workers are not being allowed to stay in the states that they're working in. They've been asked to go back, and yet there's nobody who's taking them back, and there's nobody who's letting them into their villages. It's almost like, where do they go? They're kind of stuck in no man's land. And this is the 20 that I don't like. You know, this is the 20 that I'm like, oh, how do we help these people? In fact, I got a call from a friend of mine who is a politician in Odisha saying, how do I use your helpline to take care of these migrant workers? Because there is so much stress and so much anxiety, and they're all captured literally in a small cell, and it's difficult. And if I remember the place, the name of the place, it doesn't come to me right now. But I look at my phone at some point and then I can tell you. But it's really bad, and that's coming from the horse's mouth, and I feel bad about that. But we don't have a choice, because they're just India. All the I mean, I work in Chandigarh a lot as well. The society is run by the migrant workers. You know, we are the entitled people. Really are not running it. We're just, you know, we're entitled. We're not running it. We don't do anything to keep our cities clean. I mean, you can see, I mean, even if you go into people's homes. I called this friend of mine who's sitting in Dehradun, and I'm like, what are you doing? It's so noisy. And he is also part of the government in some way, and I was finding it quite amusing about what he's doing. And I said, well, what are you doing? He goes, I'm doing jharu pocha, and which is like sweeping and swabbing, and I'm like doing the dishes, and I'm like, wow, that's amazing, you know. So because they don't do that, and finally, like they have to get their hands dirty, and these are the human stories that are coming out, that, you know, people are getting back to their roots. Definitely there are pros and cons, and they're getting to understand, spend time with their children, understand how and what they need to do to be involved. I think it's really going to change a lot of things moving forward. We can go to the slides fast. This is the spraying that was happening with the disinfectants. And this is on that side, it says Gaon mein Pravesh. My Hindi is really bad, but it says that you can't enter here. You can't enter the village. So it's people getting sprayed and people not allowed to enter villages. That's what I was trying to show here, that they're stuck. They don't know where to go. I did put, because some people are calling us, we have that helpline, so I try to put some stats to it. Financial crisis is huge. People across different strata of society are feeling it. Relationship issues, and it shows the kind of like, you know, one day, the first day in it, the 5th day in it, the 12th day, which is what's happening. And it's, I kid you not, that mental health is growing the fastest. I mean, we are definitely, the longer the days go, the higher the mental health illnesses get. So we have to prep up, and we have to be able to support this, because, you know, you might come to terms with the fact that you can't do anything about the financial crisis. You might come to terms about the fact that your relationship may be either breaking down or building up. You might come to terms with the fact that you are concerned about your family members, but you know these things you can't do anything about. But what's happening internally? That is something you are not prepared for, and that is what is going to be growing. And mental health has to be addressed. And I mean, I'm not just saying this because I'm a spokesperson for mental health, but I can see it every day. Even when I talk to people, I can see how they've gone from being motivated, positive, to being completely stumped, because it's 12 days now. Now is when it's going to really extend, and people are going to lose that eustress that they had going for them, or that optimal stress that they had going for them, because it's stretching them beyond their limitations. And I know you want to talk about how that really can be helped later on. We can go there at that point. This is the helpline that we started. The helpline is really manned by 460 counselors, therapists, volunteers with no experience, NGO workers, all kinds of people. And that's why we do not say it's a counseling helpline. It is a well-being helpline, and we've trained people to just be able to listen, to be able to comprehend what the person is saying, to be able to respond to them, to be able to kind of bring them out of that, just using a very simple ABC model of counseling. And it is working. It is working because they can talk about what they're going through. Now, we've also understood, because by popular demand, they were like, but who do we escalate this to? How do we get psychiatrists to talk to? How do we get psychologists to talk to? So now we've kind of broken it down into 2 levels, and it can be escalated to somebody who is in that position. But the first line of defense will always be that volunteer, because we have the most people in that range, and the doctors are stretched. And I mean, one of my docs who's leading this program said, don't give me anybody, just send me messages. Just send me messages and I'll respond on the WhatsApp, because there's just too much going on, and there's too many people whose hand we have to hold, and there's too many suicidal attempts, and I don't think I can do this by just being on the call. So we're cognizant of their time, we're cognizant of their capabilities, and we want to make sure that the volunteers are well prepped to be able to handle basic mental health issues. So there are challenges going on about fitness and online fitness, and we're like, why not? Why not mental fitness? Let's do an online challenge on mental fitness. And I think the team here that's together should really come up with, and including the people that are watching this and who are here, just come up with what can we do? What are the 5 things we can do as a challenge for mental health fitness? And let's take that up and promote that and let that go viral. Like, why not the ice bucket challenge? And like, this should be actually better because we need this more. Actually, ice bucket might also work because it'll really calm you down. But anyway, let's go with this and do a mental health challenge eventually. So anyway, that's the cycle of what the counselor says, but I mean, I don't need to go into details about that, therapists and volunteers. So this is us, almost not together, almost not even looking at each other, but we're around, and we're all around in this matrix, and we can only support each other in this time. And I want to thank Raghu for giving us the opportunity to really come together on this really wonderful topic. And I hope a lot more people, stream live so that they can all hear what all the experts in this panel have to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Prakriti. You really took your job very seriously and showed us the entire landscape of what's happening in India. Really enjoyed your talk. And I promise I will get active on the helpline from tomorrow. I've been ignoring most of the messages, but I think it's truly commendable what you have sort of mobilized. Really, I don't think it's unprecedented again. I mean, 450 or 460 volunteers. I'm getting goosebumps as I'm saying this, because I'm seeing the chat and I'm seeing people saying, what next? When is my mock call? When can I start my calls? So it's really heartwarming. And one thing that I think, where most people are very, very quick to just be dismissive of the government and say, what the hell, you're not doing enough. And I was pleasantly surprised. I needed to go get a medicine for my dog, and I was terrified. And I went to the market, and there was no issue, no cop bothered me. They were smiling. So I think we've got to think of that 80-20 to kind of be positive. So I think it's a very important narrative to stick to not highlight the negative so much, but just try and keep the positive stories going. So, okay, over to Raghu now. So Dr. Raghu Kiran Appasani is a psychiatrist, neuroscientist, mental health advocate, and social entrepreneur, focused on bridging the gap between Western and Eastern practices to create a wholesome society. He's a founder and CEO of the Minds Foundation, a mental health nonprofit for which he has been recognized as a One Young World Delegate Ambassador, Starting Block Fellow, Nexus Global Delegate, Echoing Green, Mass Challenge, and Kellogg Innovation Network Delegate. He most recently launched Circle Space, a new wellness company that specializes in addressing the growing subclinical mental health space. Raghu received his Bachelor's of Arts in Neuroscience and Behavior Science in Society for Wesleyan University, and his MD from the University of Massachusetts Medical School. And Today, Raghu will be talking about he'll be highlighting some of the obstacles that the frontline health workers are facing at this time. And later on, Raghu, I'm going to question each one of you that how are you dealing with your own mental health, your front and center. So start prepping your answers.
I think my internet might get bad at that point. But no, thank you so much. And thanks to Craig and Prakriti and Nina for joining in. And you've covered so much, and there's so much to cover as was mentioned. However, you know, as Nina mentioned, I'm a psychiatrist here in Los Angeles in California. I'm a resident, so I'm in training right now. And it has its own challenges being in training, and I'm sure Craig could attest to this as well. But in this particular time of uncertainty, it's even much more difficult. And one of the concepts that I'd like to bring up is this concept of moral injury. And moral injury is something that is typically applied to those who are going to war, where they're faced with ethical decision making, and it really makes them think deep about their values. So we've seen this already in some of the news of physicians and doctors in Italy who have had to make decisions about, you know, who to intubate and ventilate between patient A and patient B due to a lack of resources. Now, New York in the United States is already facing quite a detrimental effect due to this virus. And in California, we're starting to see it escalate. And the moral injury concept, you know, I can see it being applied very clearly now to physicians and to frontline medical professionals, anyone from nursing to nursing attendants to respiratory therapists. And it's something that we really do need to address now. It's something that we are not trained for necessarily in medical and nursing school. Perhaps military physicians are trained for that. However, you know, it's a very important concept. And so, you know, there's a few things that I think come up as we know from what Craig said already, that there are long-term effects of trauma and PTSD and depression and anxiety rates in these communities. It's unprecedented that, you know, that this is happening globally, something that hasn't happened. So some practical tips that, you know, I like to bring up that could potentially help all of us, not just frontline workers, but all of us, is practicing gratitude. So when you practice gratitude, you start to feel good about something that you can recognize. So try to think about the values that you have and the family that you have and the community that you have. And even journaling that and writing it down and putting it into action is very important. Some other things to really try to do is to put yourself on this media diet or social media diet where, you know, you stick to 5 or 10 minutes in the morning and the evening where you look at news, and the rest of the day you don't do it, because otherwise research has actually shown that even if you're not directly impacted by a disaster or the trauma, by actually consuming media and data, you can have long-term mental health and psychological distress effects. And this has been shown particularly with the 9/11 attacks that happened. I also want to stress, when you get this information, to follow it from official sources: CDC, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, World Health Organization. We have a number of tools that we have curated and posted online, which we'll share after. Sharing a moment of kindness. I personally love this one. We get a lot of surge of dopamine and excitement when we get likes and comments on social media, but instead of just scrolling, take a moment to actually reach out to a friend or a family member or someone you haven't spoken to in a while even, and have an actual conversation with them. Many of us have this time right now as the world has shut down for repairs, you know, and we saw that image of the flower budding in the beginning of this webinar. And with this moment of kindness, you can actually cultivate community, which is my third point here, and really focus on not socially distancing yourself, but physically distancing yourself and socially bringing yourself together. There's a number of tools now. We're fortunate with Zoom and FaceTime and Skype and all of these tools to really engage with each other. Yes, it's not a complete substitute for physical, presence, but there's a lot we can do, and we can still do things together. So just remember that the social distancing doesn't equal emotional distancing. And the last piece is to maintain a routine. So try to get up, dress, in a regular routine. And that actually means, maintaining a good sleep hygiene schedule, and also maintaining an exercise schedule if you do that. And also making sure you're eating healthy and staying on a good health schedule too. I want to leave some time for questions. There's definitely a lot to talk about. And the last point I just want to make that's really popping out is we saw, we just saw some slides of the migrant workers and how now India is actually focusing on some of them and providing them resources. We're seeing the same thing actually in the United States, where we have a very, very large homeless population in Los Angeles who there were resources, but not very many before. And now the government's actually putting them in hotels and motels and providing them housing and providing them more resources. So it's an interesting concept actually to think about. And maybe we'll hold on to those values when we come on the other side of this.
Thank you so much for that, Raghu. So I think we're going to go straight ahead and jump into the questions. We had a number of questions come in through registration. So I think I'm going to throw the first question at Craig, where somebody said, asked that any suggestions on what can be done to take care of our trainees, attending psychiatrists, and other members of the inpatient treatment team while caring for our patients?
Yeah, thank you for the question, and it's a hard question, how to take care of the caretakers, but I think the best way to answer that would be to, if I can get the slides, please, with a concept called psychological first aid, which is coming right up, but basically is sort of, yeah, this is a slide right here. This is the guidance from experts, even the National Institutes of Mental Health here in the United States. These are the basic principles for meeting people's psychological needs during the acute aspects, like the immediate aspects of a trauma like this. And so to answer your question about how to help the trainees and everyone sort of, let's say on the front lines and the physicians, rather than give you specifics, kind of giving you these guidelines. And really what these guidelines get at is that people have basic needs, just like we saw in some of the images, many of the images from Prakriti about food, and we heard from Raghu about shelter, all the way up to problems where they are in a lot of distress and need more than basic needs met. And so in some sense, Raghu's sort of 5-point slide gets at this too. But these are the principles that I would think about in trying to figure out what's best for your doctors to take care of them. And these are the same principles that we should be using with anybody facing distress or experiencing distress right now. And you just kind of need to translate them into your local circumstances. So I hope that at least broadly answers your question.
Yes, it does. And another thing that was coming to mind, Prakriti, when you and I were talking, was that because of the lockdown that we're all experiencing, there's a lot of time to reflect. And it's kind of overwhelming because you're suddenly being bombarded with the realities of your life. I mean, I know I'm going through it. I'm on call with my therapist like twice a week these days, just to make sure that I'm sort of centered. What would you recommend for people about how to deal with that, the sense of overwhelm that's happening right now with self-reflection?
I think, Nina, first you should be calling my helpline, not your therapist. Okay. You know, I love the question. There are two sides to this. India is the parent country for being. We already know we know meditation, we know yoga. We know this before it got um, misaligned to capsule versions of what it really is, right? We, in our innate wisdom, we know how to still ourselves. We've known this since we were born. We've been taught this like in every home, in different, doesn't matter what religion you come from, it's practiced. The people that have moved away from it are the ones who are consistently wrapping themselves up in activity because they want to escape from themselves. So we're talking about really getting to, again, the human side of yourself. And unfortunately, that human side may not be that beautiful, not as beautiful as your outside. So it causes a lot of anxiety when you're looking at yourself and you're looking at, it reminds me of Michael Jackson's song where he's saying, I'm talking to the man in the mirror and I'm asking him to change his ways. And I think that, he was really profound, but B, it is a difficult time. And it is not easy when I was asking this girlfriend of mine who has a husband who's not there usually because he travels. And I'm like, how's it going? Like, what's happened with like your situation? She's like, I can't get it. It's so difficult. Like, I'm just so used to having him gone for like 8 months. Like, this is not easy. It isn't easy. It isn't easy because it's changing your whole life around. I'm not used to being at home myself. I'm used to working somewhere else and like coming back home. And I have the capability of disconnecting from my work and then sort of being present in my home. And I don't have that now. I mean, I'm juggling it all the time and it's all come together. And it's difficult, but that's my personal, experience of this. I think a lot of people are going through this, and I think the most important thing really is, I know that we said that breathe and do this and do that, and do it in the morning and try to get to a place of calm. But I think that everybody has a body clock, and as long as you utilize it's like a muscle, and if you utilize that muscle, that you may have a sliver off, and then you just keep building it. Which is really like building your resilience, understanding what triggers are for you. So for example, if I'm feeling a little bit low, I'll listen to some music and I'll pep it up really loud and I'll dance with my daughter. So I know what I want to do to get myself to that space. I think everybody needs to really investigate what helps them. What helps them, because it's not a prescription that one can give. It may be breathing, it may be yoga, it may be, like you said, a gratitude journal. It could be so many different things, but the anxiety of being on your own, the anxiety of understanding who you are, then realizing, so we're all going through, almost like all the thinking people are going through what's called a midlife crisis usually, but we're all going through it now. We're all going through it because we've had a moment to pause. We've had a moment to reflect, and we've had a moment to really understand that, is this an existential crisis that I'm going through? Because, what am I doing? What have I been doing? And is this really valuable? And when everything stops, really understanding, what are you meant to do? What is your purpose? I think it's a great time to think about that purpose and redefine your channel, because you have a moment that's been given to you and you're blessed really to have that time to think about really what you want to do. And I can see that a lot of change will take place. And I think you need to embrace that and be open to accepting the new you and allowing that change to manifest into something beautiful, like that from that rock, when a leaf can come out. I mean, I'm sure we can create that harmony within ourselves eventually.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. So we do have a couple of questions that are popping up in our Q&A window. So Raghu, I think you've already answered, how do you define self-care in the context of COVID-19? But I think it might be interesting for you to focus on what can we do to reduce PTSD for healthcare workers. Craig did talk about it a little bit, but if you can talk just pointedly towards PTSD, that would be wonderful.
Sure. That's definitely a very challenging question. I'm sure Craig has a lot more experience than me in this, but some of the things that I've been researching and that have been being put into action where I'm working is this care for the caregiver model. And it's splitting up into 3 levels. So the first level is supportive consultation for the front line. So actually similar to the helpline that the Wellbeing volunteers have designed. It's not, it's not a replacement for therapy, but it's supportive, informal, non-clinical outreach care for the vulnerable population. And vulnerable population in this context is frontline health workers. They are folks that maybe haven't dealt with mental health issues in the past. They're emotionally tired from seeing this suffering. They're afraid to go home. They're afraid to be around their families. So it's that first level. And then the second level is this warm handoff to clinical care, transitioning them to an actual psychiatrist or a therapist where they can get some more good care. And the third level is obviously if there's a imminent safety issues, urgency, due to suicidal thoughts and things like that, and getting them into a hospital and clinical setting much faster. So this basic system is very helpful. There's also the next piece is this Let's Talk program that Cornell had designed many years ago that is actually quite relevant. It also focuses on increasing accessibility, allowing people to design problem-solving skills, active listening, and this drop-in session. So those are things that I think can help. The last piece is that where I see the most distress happening in my colleagues is when they feel that, leadership or administration at their hospital is hiding something or not providing them the full information. So something that has helped is that our administration has increased the number of town hall meetings, and they live stream it. So they twice a week minimum, they host an hour or two with administration where they give updates. They email us every day about updates. So having information and feeling empowered with that is very, very important for frontline workers to be able to do their job and actually know that they're being supported. Oh.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for that, Raghu. So there's another question over here, Craig, that I think I'm going to shoot towards you. My question is, what are the ethical principles that need to be followed by healthcare workers while advising home quarantine for people who are categorized as suspect cases? This is something, I imagine you'd be able to address.
The ethical principles, I'm not sure if what specifically the questioner has in mind in asking that. But right now, we're in a moment where we're balancing personal liberties with public safety, right? And right now, public safety has to win out. And we understand that these are competing principles, right? But this is sort of the greatest health for the greatest number right now, and that comes at the cost of quarantine. And so I think that's how I would basically answer the question. I also think that thankfully we're in an era where quarantine doesn't have to be a stark, cold thing that it was in another era, in large part because of the internet and our ability to communicate. So I think the ethical mismatch there from the deprivation of liberties and being told to be quarantined is much less now because of the access to social support through the internet, and hopefully also access to food and other stuffs that you need and more in quarantine.
I think that we had discussed earlier as well. Interesting.
Sorry, Nina, can you repeat yourself? You were on mute.
Oh, okay, sorry. Thank you for that, Craig. So Prakriti, this one is for you. It seems to have popped up here as well. The person was very persistent, messaged before and again now. So what's a good way of comforting our grandparents and parents? COVID places them at a higher risk than us youngsters, and how can we help them find comfort? So, your topic was the vulnerable. So if you could just comment on this, it'd be wonderful.
I think it's universal, actually, in terms of comforting people who are maybe highly stressed. Again, decompressing them by asking them to align the way in which they're thinking to sort of, so one of the, I'm sure everybody knows this a little stuff, but I'll just repeat it. The techniques really are simple, where you address the fact that they are worried about this and they are worried about their mortality. And of course, not saying it like that, but really being worried is normal and natural because it is a scary time. And the only thing that can hold them in good stead is to, bring about, when that thought comes, to bring about a more positive frame of mind by focusing by distracting yourself from that thought and focusing on something positive and doing something positive. And I know with the elderly in India, especially, a lot of satsangs have opened up again online, and you know, a lot of religious meets, and the elderly especially are very devoted in that way still. And I think that if they were given strategies to be able to, a lot of times, and I've seen this myself, I have ladies who are like 80. Actually, somebody called me today at 80 and said, I want to volunteer, but your age group stops at 70. I'm like, no, go ahead, like put in 70, that's fine, nobody's checking your age. And she was like, I don't know how to do it. So I think one of the key things is get them on a Zoom call, if you're not together, the elderly in your house, teach them how to get on some of these very important social media activities that might aid them, even in terms of communicating with them. So a lot of their anxiety when they're part of a community, because it's easy for us to get into community because we know how to use, we're technology enabled. They're not technology enabled. So one call might align them to do that and make them less hesitant, because you can't change the environment. So if you've got an activating event, you can't change it. You can't change the consequence. You can only change the belief system. So we're only working on how do you change that belief system. It's a simple ABC model again, right? How do you change that belief system? By getting them to come up with strategies that might be able to support them. Obviously, we already know they can't go out and they can't expose themselves to the outside world. The government is supporting and supplying goods and services to your door. So they have that as well. If they don't know how to get to that, maybe the child or the kid in the house could help them kind of formulate how to get that, link that up and create that community for them. Because like you said, in your building, there's a community and it's important. Because, I mean, the other day, there's a house party new app that's come out. I mean, they're not paying me to say this, but I mean, I'm just allowed to say it's a house party. And you can have like 4 or 5 people on this like call at the same time. And it's pretty entertaining. And all these, like, I told it to my mother because she was like, how are you doing that? How are you talking to all your friends? I'm like, house party. And she goes, how do you do it? And I said, here, this is how you do it. She had such a blast after that. She was like, oh, I don't miss them now. You know, and she's also 70 plus. And she doesn't miss them now. She was very happy to do that. I think you need to teach them things, teach them the skills to help themselves, because you can't be there all the time. And I think that's really important. I mean, we've said it many times in the Bible as well. And we've said it everywhere, like teach a man how to fish, don't give him a fish, right? So teach a man how to fish, teach your grandparents how to access technology, to be able to access each other.
It's 8 o'clock.
Sorry, to be in the community. I think that's it.
Great, thank you. In fact, my daughters taught my mother so much. My mother said to me the other day, she said, don't disturb me right now. I have a house party call. And I was like, excuse me? Like, you know. So, yeah, so this one, again, Craig, is for you. Is what can some of the tangible ways in which domestic abuse victims can stay safe during the lockdown and social distancing? Heartbreaking question, but it's, you know, an important one.
Well, I think sufferers of domestic violence, interpersonal violence, have a tough decision to make, right? Because in some sense, they're facing an immediate threat to their lives right there in their own homes, and so there's some decision, you know, to the extent that they, you know, can make this kind of a free decision. Is that where they should be quarantining themselves in their homes, and do they have the freedom to not be there, you know, from their abuser? But I think, and that's a kind of a case-by-case decision. You know, in some sense, their dilemma is the virus versus their abuser, and I don't know if in all cases fear of the virus should entirely win out every time.
Yeah, that's a very challenging question to ask. You know, I think just to add on to what Craig said, it's really, you know, two things that are dangerous, and you're kind of outweighing and balancing it. That I don't have much more to add than what Craig said, other than that we will add some resources as much as we can on our website after this to provide. I will say that there has been a clear surge in the number of helplines and hotlines available for that vulnerable population as well. And we definitely will be sharing those. Okay. Nina, are you still there?
I think this is a topic, it didn't come to me in that. Yes, can you hear me? No.
Yep, could you just repeat that? You were cutting off a bit.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's unless you're a victim of domestic abuse yourself, it's not something that comes to your mind. But I did read this on social media a couple of days ago, and I thought, oh my good Lord, it's an awful situation to be in. And then Prakriti and I were talking a couple of days ago about, you know, how incest and, you know, domestic violence is probably at an all-time high right now. So, I mean, regarding ethics has posted another post over here that let me simplify my ethics question. I understand that home quarantine comes with a lot of social implications. For example, stigma shows with case. One of the incidents that I can bring here is an information about a person who was suspect, was shared in WhatsApp before it was informed to the actual person, and the impact of this is perception of the community was started looking at him as if he has done committed many other guidelines how to address these kinds of issues. So I think basically, probably the information went viral before the person even knew, and it was on social media, on a WhatsApp group, and the ramifications were very harsh. So are there any guidelines as such?
So maybe I can just take that really quick. You know, I don't know of any official guidelines per se, but I will say that there's a strong social stigma associated with being affected by the virus, and there's a psychological distress to that as well. And if you look at, you know, the headlines from Italy, where if you are outside in public and you have the virus, they can actually fine you or even imprison you because they see it as almost, you know, murder or attempted murder. So there is a big social stigma to it. I think the best thing that we can do is try to understand that this is not something that anyone is trying to do intentionally, right? And we have to support each other as a community because literally the entire globe is going through this together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's another
I'm sorry, I would also add, it's also a matter of how people share this information, right? It's, you know, it's also, there's a way to share it that's also compassionate for the sufferer, rather than saying, you know, run for the hills. It would be so-and-so is sick, let's all be thinking of them, right? Then everybody knows they're sick, right? But everyone, it's framed in a much different way. It's framed in a helping way rather than a stigmatized way.
Yes, but I myself have heard of a couple of cases like this, that, you know, there's a poster put outside your house if you're quarantined because you've been traveling, and people have shared wrong information saying that so and the entire family has COVID-19 and they don't. So it's unfortunate. There's another question for Dr. Katz and Dr. Appasani. The biology of this new virus is not known yet, but people are anxiously waiting for vaccines around the world. And there is a myth propagating in India quickly, and point of care diagnostics. I feel it is a long way to go. Dr. Katz and Dr. Appasani, what is your inner perception on these?
So what was the about the availability of vaccines? Was that the question?
Yes, and how long will it probably take?
Oh, I think it's the estimates are it's going to be probably a year to a year and a half before vaccines are available and distributed. So we've got to do something in the meantime, something else in the meantime.
And I do want to address, there's a second piece to that question about point of care diagnostics. So there is a number of testing coming out and have come out globally about rapid testing and about, you know, at-home testing kits. However, we do need to be wary of this. And again, I would say that it's great that so many companies and folks are jumping on the wagon to develop these things, but we really do need to stick to the testing that's coming out officially from our governments and from our hospitals, because the false positives and the false negatives out of some of these home tests are pretty significant, and that can lead to misinformation. And so as much as people are anxious, they really need to think about, by getting a test, how will this really change how I live my day? Because at this point, due to the virus and the nature that it works in and it lives in, we do need to all basically act as if, you know, we have it, and try to protect each other.
And another question, I think, which really warrants an answer would be, what guidelines should a patient of eating disorder follow in a lockdown? Are they at some sort of risk because of changing eating habits? So what guidelines can a patient with eating disorders follow? Who'd like to take that?
That's a challenging one. I mean, right, being in lockdown changes our normal routines. One, I mean, they're just right there. There's a lot of challenges to the person with the eating disorder. Change of routine, and stress, right, and fear, and how you deal with those things. I mean, hopefully, somebody with an eating disorder has have had access to treatment already. And this is the time to, if they are not still in treatment, to get a booster shot, and get back online with their therapist or doctor, and get a booster shot, particularly on cognitive behavioral skills that can be very helpful for monitoring things. So you just kind of need a reminder, because it's going to take extra effort right now.
Okay, there's another question that's come in. I was wondering, to what degree are the dimensions of the pandemic/disaster perceived as inherently stressful or frightening by those who experience them, and indeed by those who may not be directly affected? And how does pre-existing psychiatric disorder influence post-traumatic morbidity? Would you like to answer that, Craig?
Yeah, I mean, there are, it's a very good question. I mean, all these are very good questions. There are very well-known risk factors for likelihood of developing some kind of psychiatric reaction to an event like this, like PTSD or major depression, or having a recurrence of an old problem. And one of them is exposure, dose of exposure, and how, you know, we can't quite measure that with a machine, right? But exposure could be, could be quantitative, like how many days you're in quarantine, or how many people were sick, or how sick you were. But there could also be emotion, and it doesn't have to also be. You don't have to see all these things with your own eyes, and you can have what we call emotional proximity to event, and knowing people that are affected, in particular, can be a factor. So exposure is a big risk factor. Having prior mental health problems is certainly a risk factor as well. Although, and honestly, it also has to do with how well treated they are before, and if they're under control before, you're going to be, of course, in much better shape. And also how people's lives were going before an event like this makes a very, very big difference. There were problems in their lives, whether it's interpersonal violence or economic strain. Things are going to go a lot harder right now, unfortunately.
One piece I just want to make sure we add to that is that substance abuse is a really, really big thing as well. So if someone, was in recovery and doing well in that trajectory, if you think about what that means, it means they had good social support and they had a system in place and a routine in place. And now that the world is turned upside down for them, they're at a very high risk of relapsing and going back into that cycle. So that's something to also be very wary of, not just for the general public, but also for frontline workers and health professionals who can be at high risk for that.
Yeah, something that came to mind, when you were talking, the point of PTSD. I know what I'm going through right now. When I was talking to my therapist, was there's almost this this anticipatory grief that one's already experiencing. So I definitely want to ask each one of you what you are doing for your own self-care at this point. I'm not going to leave you guys. So you all have like about 10 minutes in total. I'm going to start with Raghu. You go first. What are you doing to take care of yourself at this time? Because you're front center. What are you doing?
Sure. So, yeah, I'm a psychiatry resident. So, you know, fortunately or unfortunately, I'm not yet dealing directly with COVID cases in, you know, the ICU. However, we did just get online training modules to complete to learn again about ICU care to be ready to be deployed. So that is a little bit anxiety provoking at times. However, you know, things that I do. So prior to all of this, I would meditate quite regularly, at least, you know, every day. I was really big into yoga and trying to eat healthy and communicating with friends and family. This particular pandemic has definitely pushed me in many, many ways. I think this will answer one of the questions from Deepak as well about what is the most important activity to calm down our anxiety. Something that really works for me is breathing exercises and meditation. I've tried to step those up quite a bit. I'll share a number of free apps and tools that are available on our website that anyone can access. I know that sometimes doing these things can be a luxury. I mean, you need a quiet space to do it, and many people have their children at home now and others in the home. So I try to stick with the regular routine, wake up, try to eat as healthy as I can. And one thing that this has done, and I wrote an article about this yesterday, which we'll share as well, is about how as much as I hate this pandemic and the virus, the silver linings that I love about it is that it's made me pause. It's made me pause and think about what values do I want to have after this long term. And it made me think about the importance and values of my family and my community. And one of the quotes that I love is from one of my favorite psychiatrists, Dr. Viktor Frankl. He's a psychiatrist from Austria. And it's between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. And I believe that this is more relevant than ever right now. So something I'm really doing is allowing myself to be present, to meditate, to allow my emotions to actually come out and process that through journaling and actually putting emotions into motion. And then other things can kind of actually happen more synergistically. So those are some things that I'm doing.
That's really lovely. And I think meditating is a wonderful tool to be using right now. And it's something I'm practicing twice a day, and it's helping tremendously. Thank you, Raghu. Now, Craig, over to you. What are you doing to take care of yourself during these times?
Thank you. Well, under all circumstances, I like to run. I've also developed a recent fondness for swimming, but my gym is closed. So one is exercise, but just to make sure I don't lose track of that. It's really important to me, and it's just getting outside and getting fresh air. I'm also just appreciating, feeling, I guess, fortunate that I can do almost all of my work remotely. And although I also have very mixed feelings about that, not being there with my colleagues at the hospital. So I deal with some measure of guilt about that, but I also focus on, I guess, the gratitude of being around my family. There are moments when there's a little too much gratitude in the air and things are loud and hectic here, but for the most part, I feel very lucky that we're all together, and also thankfully so far all well. And while we're quoting, I'm going to take a page from Raghu and quote something. There's something called the Serenity Prayer, which I forget the source, but it's just a fantastic thing under all circumstances, but certainly now, right? It's and I preach it all the time. I try to practice it, and for those who don't know it, right, it's God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I try real hard to, say it to myself as much as I say it to other people.
That's really lovely. Thank you so much for sharing. And Prakriti, I don't know what diet you survive on, because I see you awake at 4:40. I see you awake at 6 o'clock. Like, what are you doing that's making you feel okay and active right now? So active.
I think it's called hypervigilance. And I've also lived through a prayer, and I'm going to quote that first, and then I'll go into what I do. And I've always lived with it, which is make me a channel of your peace. Where there's hatred, let me sow the love. Where there's injury, your pardon, Lord. And where there's pain, through faith in thee, my Lord, Master, grant that I may never seek so much to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, and to give or something, and to love as to love with all my soul. And I think it's always been my purpose in life to be able to do that. And I think this is the only opportunity that I've had really to exercise that, to bring so many people together, to mobilize them into something positive. It keeps me alive and awake, you're right, all night, all day, and still I have the energy. I'm channeling it. And there has been so much work that I unfortunately haven't had a moment to pause and meditate. I hate meditating. I just want to put it out there. I'm more of a runaway healer than anything else. Like, my meditation is swimming. My meditation is doing. Like, when you get into a zone and you're fully focused, you're in the zone. That's meditation for me. And I find that this has given me an opportunity to really be, I don't get tired because I'm there. I'm fully invested. I'm there. And in terms of diet, one of the things that keeps me active, and it's not an eating disorder, is to really recognize how much you need. We do not need as much food as we eat. Just because it's a social thing, we kind of like eat like 3 meals and they're full, and it's too much. It's too much. And if I do that, I'm not going to be able to live the way I do and to have the energy that I do, because I would be bombarding myself with a diet that's just going to pull my energy down. So I think I eat really healthy, and that's one of the things that I want to tell everybody to do. I mean, lots of watery substances with fruits and like vegetables that have water in them. I think that's really important. Nuts, your seeds, do the good stuff, if you can. I don't want to sound entitled. Of course, if you can't, we have the chocolate and we have whatever we have. But if you can, do the good stuff. It's good for you, and do something that you enjoy, given the circumstances and so that you're in, because you do have a choice at any point in your life to reframe the way in which you perceive what's happening to you. And I think that's why I have the energy that I do. And I haven't got to healing myself with meditation yet, unfortunately.
Great, thank you so much. So Raghu, I'm going to hand it over to you now.
Sure. Yeah, thank you so much, Nina, for moderating and for everyone joining us. Sorry. Okay, so, this is the first webinar we did. Fortunately, there weren't too many technical issues. So we'll be doing many more, most likely on a weekly basis. We'll also develop a virtual check-in, drop-in session, kind of like office hours. It's not a replacement for therapy or medical professionals, but just a place for people to connect from our community. So we'll share all of those things. We designed quite last minute, just a one-page resource page on our website. It's Minds Foundation, MINDS foundation.org/COVID, COVID. It's some vetted sources and some helpline numbers in the US as well as in India. Obviously, one of the best resources is this Wellbeing helpline that's also there and posted with all the information. We can also be reached on our India WhatsApp number 24/7 that is manned by our staff who are social workers. And so thank you so much for joining in. One piece I do want to add, just to clarify, is when I mention the word meditation, I don't mean just the traditional stereotypical meditation of sitting in silence. I think for me, cooking a meal is very, very meditative, and going on a walk is very meditative, if that is feasible. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. It's more about being mindful and being in the moment as you're doing something and tuning in while tuning out the external. So that's really what I mean by it. And so thank you everyone for joining us. There's so much to talk about. I think we covered quite a bit. There's still questions that came in. We will try to answer those and email folks individually. This recording will also shortly be up on our website, and you can share it with your friends and family and colleagues. So thank you again, and hope everyone enjoyed it, and we're open to feedback. Just email us, info@mindsfoundation.org. Thanks so much.